Hey kids! So today we're going to go over what is called the Sleeping Freshman board notes because typically these would be done on the board. This counts as your review for the entire book. So basically, if you see it or hear it in this particular video, that means that there is a good chance it will be on the test because nothing that is in here is without a purpose. So let's get going. So, Sleeping Freshmen Never Lie board notes, also known as test review. And I can't type today. Test review. All right, first off, let's start with Scott. Scott is our narrator. He is part of the Three Musketeers. And he does sports reviews, which he hates. He also does Tom Swifties, which, he enjoys. So, list of Scott's failed attempts to get closer to Julia. Number 1, joining the newspaper. Turned out Julia was only a guest writer. Whoops. The play. Julia tried out for a play. He was like, well, nobody in their right mind is going to turn her down. Look at her. Of course I will build the stage and not have to sing because I didn't realize this is a musical. Dances. He didn't get within 10 feet of her, and she spent the entire time with, Vernon. And then, of course, there was the student council. So the first time around, she lost and he won because she tried to get freshman president. Scott just wanted to be on the council to be closer to Julia. And when the results came in, did not end well for Scott. Turned out that Julia did not win the president, which meant she was not on the student council and Scott was. And therefore, he had yet another obligation to deal with. All right, Scott's family. So, Scott's mom and dad, his parents tell him that, congratulations, you've been promoted to older brother, which takes him a minute to figure out what that actually means. His mom is going baby crazy. That's the hormones talking. I've already explained to you how that tends to work with the nesting syndrome and all that. Dad buys a freaking Corvette of all things, which that is a midlife crisis if I've ever heard of one. And not only is it a Corvette, which pregnant women really can't fit into because they're tiny two-seater cars, but it's also a Corvette that is a money hole because it has to be worked on. Then we meet Bobby. So Bobby is Scott's big brother. He decided that he was just going to run away from all the craziness at home. And his big secret, which is that he never actually learned how to read, comes out when Scott repeatedly tries to get him to read the newspaper articles that he's written. Bobby's big dream is to play in a band in Nashville. And eventually he does get it. Okay, Smelly is Scott's name for the new baby, which is a combination of Sean and Emily, which at the beginning of the book, they don't know, obviously, if they're having a boy or a girl because, Scott would have noticed if his mom, suddenly had a giant pregnancy stomach overnight. Okay, Patrick. Patrick is one of the Three Musketeers. Please remember that there are actually 4 Musketeers despite the name. The Three Musketeers are Scott, Patrick, Mitch, and Kyle. So Patrick is a former member of the Three Musketeers. First he moved to Texas, then Japan. Not by choice, but his dad's in the military, so you got to go where the government wants you to go. Mitch, another former Three Musketeer. He's the first to get a girlfriend, and that basically means that he's also the first to leave his friends behind. Bad move, Mitch. Bad move. Kyle, also a former member of the Three Musketeers. He joined the wrestling team and also leaves his old friends behind, mostly meaning Scott, because by this point, it's literally just Kyle and Scott. There are two musketeers, and then there is one musketeer, and that's Scott. Poor Scott. Julia. Scott thinks he's in love. She is dating Vernon, the evil football player quarterback, who also happens to be on the wrestling team and does not have a very good record of, winning in either sport. So Julia briefly was on the newspaper, but she was only a guest writer, as Scott discovered. She tried out for the play, which turned out to be the musical version of A Tale of Two Cities. Audition did not go well. Her friend Kelly made the cut, but not Julia, and that led to some tension between the two of them in a period where they wouldn't speak to each other. The dances, she goes to with Vernon, except for the very last one at the end. And the student council, she loses. Scott gets a genius idea, is like, you know what? I'm not going to screw with this anymore. There's no Julia. Nobody listens to me. This is the most boring thing I got to do, and I got to do 50 million other things. I'm going to quit. And then it turns out that Scott is not the only person who felt that way, and after Scott quits, Julia becomes president. Dun, 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 dun. Scott screamed a very unprintable word when he learned about that. Then we have Lee, who's just an endlessly fascinating character. She gets the nickname Weirdly. She is socially awkward. Scott is in the sense that she doesn't seem to care about making friends so much. Notice the key word there is seems. Scott in particular is especially awkward around her, but eventually becomes her friend. She likes vampires, and she seems like goth punk emo kind of vibes. She has a boatload of piercings and bright green hair, which, to my knowledge, in modern day, currently, green hair is not something you're born with. She seems to like Scott. And one day she comes to school with bandages on her wrists, like ace bandages, not band-aids, don't forget that. And she tries to put it off and says it's just a burn. But Scott is super suspicious of this. Okay, Mouth. Mouth got his nickname from the fact that he talks a lot. There's a reason that Scott envisioned him in the hospital with an IV drip attached to a dictionary. He comes off as annoying to a lot of people, including our narrator, which would be Scott. It's always friendly. Mouth basically just wants to make friends. He does not have a whole lot of luck in that department. Scott actually gets mad at him because he ends up being the book reviewer for the paper, which is the job that Scott thought he was taking when he said he would join the newspaper in his attempt to get closer to Julia. And his first book review almost sends Scott over the edge because the book he reviewed is something that Scott calls hot garbage. Mouth is bad at taking hints. He sees Scott as a friend, but Scott actually does not like him very much and tries to avoid him when possible. Okay, Mr. Franca, Scott's English teacher. Scott's favorite class. He opens Scott's mind to ideas. He pushes him to join the paper, introduces him to the concept of Tom Swifties. An example of a Tom Swiftie: I need a pencil sharpener, Tom said bluntly. So the pencil is blunt, hence the need for the sharpener. Tom Swifties are, in fact, a type of pun. Next section, Scott's life. All right, so Scott has 4 family members. His mom and his dad, his big brother Bobby, and, the surprise, the unknown baby who he calls Smelly for most of the book until the gender is determined. He has friends. So at the beginning of the book, we have Kyle, Patrick, and Mitch. Kyle turns out to be a jerk. when he joins the wrestling team. He is a former member of the Three Musketeers. Patrick was the glue. His family moved to Texas. Also a former member of the Three Musketeers. Mitch gets a girlfriend, dumps friends, also former member of the Three Musketeers. New friends. We have Lee, the goth chick, who becomes close. Wesley. Wesley starts out really scary. And for reasons that we don't quite figure out, decides to step in and save Scott's life a couple times, especially when Vernon's about to pound him into dust, and befriends him. And that works out for Scott in a lot of ways, because not only does he now have a ride to school that doesn't involve getting pounded every day in the bus, but Wesley's friendship protects him from a lot of the bullies. Mouse talks a lot and thinks of Scott as a friend, but Scott doesn't feel that way. Julia was a friend in kindergarten, but not anymore, and Scott's wishing that he had stayed in close touch with her, since the magic puberty cocoon happened over summer, and now she has emerged as a beautiful butterfly, or as he calls her, a goddess. And then we have Toby, who I spelled his name wrong. It should actually be IE. Toby was Scott's roommate in the hospital. He originally got Scott into reading. Partly it was the sense of guilt for not paying attention, but the important thing is the end result. So, Scott's enemies and obstacles. Number one, this happens a lot. Vernon and a majority of the football team, especially the first few articles, don't like Scott's articles, because Scott doesn't know how to write about sports, and he especially doesn't know how to write sports when it comes to, I don't know, a team that can't win. Another obstacle, Smelly and the pregnancy. His mom is acting completely nuts. She makes them move cinder blocks out of the nursery because she thinks that something bad will happen if they don't move them before the baby is born. His parents together, both mom and dad, are not paying any attention to him, and he's not used to that, because especially being the younger sibling, he was used to getting a lot more attention than he is right now. Kyle, who was a former friend, becomes a total jerk and is part of a plot that involves his girlfriend, Kelly, who lures Scott into getting beat up by Vernon in a dark room. Vernon does not like it when guys hit on his girlfriend, who happens to be Julia. Sports articles. That's an obstacle because he didn't want to sign up for this in the first place, but oops, too bad, don't have a choice. Obstacle, his voice during the play auditions. With the very unfortunate timing that just seems to go with Scott's life in general, when he went to do the auditions, his voice broke. And that meant that he was offered a place on the stage crew, because the drama teacher decided that there was no way on this green earth that he was about to put someone with an unpredictable voice out on the stage. Mr. Cravado, the gym coach. Scott hates gym. He always feels like he's dying no matter what exercise they're doing. Mr. Cravado, if you'll remember, also was temporarily put in charge of Spanish, which meant that for Spanish, they'd had to do push-ups while counting in Spanish. All the different Spanish teachers. The French Spanish teacher, the Australian Spanish teacher, the Asian Spanish teacher, and then the regular English-speaking Spanish teacher. All of them provide language barriers, but by some miracle, Scott manages to accidentally learn how to speak Spanish anyway, as we saw on Take Your Child to Work Day when he went with his dad. And a family was there speaking in Spanish, and Scott understood them without realizing they were speaking in Spanish. And he could not figure out why his dad was not answering the people. So he answered them and went back and forth. And it wasn't until he ended the conversation that he realized that they had both been speaking in Spanish the whole time. High school in general is a huge obstacle slash enemy if your name is Scott. Julia doesn't notice Scott's attempts to get closer to him. As far as he's concerned, she probably doesn't even realize he exists. Wesley is an enemy for a very long time because he frequently likes to borrow money from Scott until they end up becoming friends. And then, as is often the case, Scott is really his own worst enemy. Deep, man. Real deep. All right, the survival journal. So this is a combination of a journal and high school survival tips guidebook. So Scott started this as a boredom thing. His guides include bus drivers, things worse than gym, school foods that are both safe and school foods that you need to avoid, different types of teachers, football commentary, which tend to be his articles, Tom Swifties, unpredictable people and why they are dangerous. Mainly that had to do with Wesley. Why Scott should not be on the wrestling team. Wesley's rule of life, mostly whatever Wesley wants, Wesley gets. Things that are spaced so far apart you forget how bad they really are. The pros to getting beat up. I don't think there are any to that one, but that's just my opinion. So the survival journal includes a lot of details from Scott's day. He ends up saying that it's not a diary because guys don't keep diaries, and that he's just keeping a record of all of this to help out his unborn sibling when they're his age, because he's way older than this baby, and Bobby's only a few years older than him, and yet Bobby barely remembers high school. So he figures, when the time comes and baby Smelly is born and starts asking me all these questions, I can just hand him this book and be like, here, this is everything you need to know about high school. Okay, reasons for Scott to write the survival journal. Number 1, he's bored on the bus. Number 2, Bobby has no useful tips because he's already forgotten his high school years. Scott remembers more about Bobby's high school than Bobby seems to remember about Bobby's high school. A safe ranting space for gathering his thoughts to help Smelly when the baby gets to high school, and the survival tips, which are, the titles of which are listed above. All right, Scott loves Julia. This is our next section. Also known as Scott stalks Julia, but that's not as catchy. So Scott has put Julia on a pedestal. He sees her as a goddess among mere mortals such as himself. Now, this is just a common sense thing, but in case you don't know it, putting a person on a pedestal is typically a bad idea, especially if you're hoping to have a relationship with that person, because eventually they will let you down, and the higher that you build up that pedestal, the worse it's gonna be. All right, Scott's failed attempts to get closer to Julia. Let's go. Number 1, newspaper. Scott joins the newspaper, finds out Julia is guest writer. Scott becomes the sports writer. He wanted to do book reviews, but Mouth has that job. So Scott joined, Julia's guest writer equals Scott sports writer. The play. Scott cries out, voice breaks, equals Scott horribly embarrassed, which translates to joining the tech crew and doing all the physical labor because the older kids won't do anything. Scott and the student council. There are 3 slots for each grade. Scott and Julia both run. He wins, but she loses. Translates to Scott gets bored, drops out. And that equals Julia becomes freshman president when other Prez drops out too. Okay, English. This one was just a chance because he had no idea whatsoever that Julia was going to be in there. He just thanked his lucky stars that they had a class together, and more importantly, that class together was not gym, which is his worst subject. He discovers that they have common interests, which makes him fall even harder for her, and she continues to ignore him. Other relationships, if your name is Scott Hudson. So, his family relationship. He is semi-close with Bobby, but very distant with his parents because they're focused on all baby all the time. The Three Musketeers, formerly close childhood friends, disbanded. Now, I'm going to add one on here because people seem to be getting confused. So, the Three Musketeers was originally a group of 4 childhood friends. So I know that the name says Three Musketeers, but there are 4 of them. So first we have Mitch, who is the first to leave because he picks a new girlfriend over his male friends. We haven't seen him since the beginning of the book, when he hits on an older girl and she agrees to go out with him. And boom, Mitch has a girlfriend. All right, second Musketeer, Patrick. First, he moves away to Texas, which is bad enough, and then he emails Scott to say that it's even worse than we thought. We're getting reinstationed in Japan. Third Musketeer, Kyle, who becomes a wrestling jock and acts like a jerk. He also gets a girlfriend as a result of becoming a jock. Number 4, Scott, the last original Musketeer and the only member left after the group breaks apart. All right, other relationships. Mouth. He sees Scott as a great friend. Scott sees Mouth as a loud obstacle. However, Scott does envy him at the dance. No matter how many times he gets rejected, Mouth keeps talking to girls and seems to just keep on going. He is full of optimism, which makes Scott kind of envious because no matter how many times girls rejected him, Mouth still kept going and asking them to dance. Julia, Scott's love interest / obsession for pretty much the whole book, doesn't even seem to notice him. Wesley, a very scary senior bully, later becomes friends with Scott. He is extremely unpredictable. Scott actually thinks that Wesley is stealing vehicles because he steals gas from parked cars. And then one day he shows up with a snowmobile, and all he will say is that he borrowed it. Now, considering Wesley's definition of borrowing money, I do understand why Scott feared that Wesley was stealing cars. Okay. Lee, the freaky new girl who seems goth, has a lot of piercings, and bright green hair. She likes dark stuff, like vampires. Turns out Scott is also interested in vampires. Okay, Scott and Lee's relationship from beginning to end. So at the beginning, he thinks that Lee is a freak and a weirdo. She likes poetry and seems nice, so they end up getting together, and Scott ditches Julia for Lee at the last dance. So that's it in a nutshell. Now we're going into more detail. Okay, so at the beginning, Scott originally avoided her. He was embarrassed to be seen with her, especially because Kyle was picking on him about spending time with weirdly because he'd asked her about the Jar poem. So as he gets to kind of know her a little bit, he finds out that they have common interests such as reading, and they become best friends. For Valentine's Day, Lee gave Scott black jelly beans, and he felt kind of bad about it. He's like, well, I don't have anything for you. And she says, reciprocation is not mandatory. In other words, you don't have to give me anything. I just wanted to give you this. Scott ended up giving Lee clearance Valentine's Day candy later to make up for missing everything. And also to make up for some rude things that he'd said. So Lee, with her piercings and crazy green hair, also likes to make other artistic statements, including a poster on her locker that says, "This is not a locker." Okay, the vampire poem, The Jar. She shares her book with Scott, and Scott ends up standing up for her when guys are making fun of her. So it is close to the end of the year. Lee invites Scott to the end of the year dance. He misunderstands and thinks that she's joking, which leads to him hurting her feelings. In order to make that up for her, he dyes his hair red and takes her to the dance in a limo to make up. Interestingly enough, Wesley drives them. At the dance, Julia approaches him. And even though this is exactly what he wanted, Scott chooses Lee over Julia. They may be dating now. From the comments that he made, a lot of people interpret the end of the book to be that they are dating, especially because Lee, who is nice, saw that Julia was alone and she sent Scott over to dance with Julia. So when Scott dances with Julia, they share some memories, and she tells him that she was actually jealous of him this whole time because everywhere she looked, he seemed to be doing something. How did he have all the time for it? And then when he comes back from that dance, Lee asked who's the better dancer, and Scott chose her. So originally, Scott thought that Lee was creepy. Her goth look is just an artistic expression, but she doesn't like being labeled by other people's. By other people, can't talk. At the end, they go to the dance together. Lee actually took out all her piercings and dyed her hair a normal color and wore a dress, which Scott was really shocked because he'd never seen her wear anything but pants. And she said that the reason that she did that is because he didn't expect her to, and she was basically wanted to surprise him. So as Scott gets to know her, his view changed. All right, next category, Scott and Julia, failed attempts and consequences. Okay, failed attempt number 1, the newspaper. Now, the ones that have these little stars here are the major failed attempts. The ones without them are minor failed attempts. So the newspaper is a major failed attempt. Attempt, newspaper. Consequence, Julia is a guest writer. Scott ends up writing sports articles. Student council, another major attempt. Result, Scott wins, but Julia loses. Secondary consequence, Scott quits, and then Julia becomes president. Play, major attempt. Scott's voice cracks on stage during audition. Translates to Scott works the stage crew. And he does all this work for no Julia, who didn't get the part. Okay, this is a minor one. Trying to say hello at the bus stop. Consequence, he ends up choking and being embarrassed. Minor 1, English class. Julia thinks he's weird, and Scott's embarrassed again. Football game. Again, minor 1. Julia hooks up with Vernon, and Scott has to watch. Minor 1 in the attempt, major 1 in the consequence. Kelly's surprise. Vernon beats crap out of Scott for liking Julia. So the main things that I want you to remember are the newspaper, the student council, and the play. Those are the 3 big failed attempts and consequence sets. And that is it. So don't forget, you need to watch this video. You need to take your own set of notes and submit them before 3 p.m. tomorrow. Tomorrow being Friday, 9/18/2020. And you guys have a wonderful weekend. I hope to see submissions. If you have any questions, go ahead and message me. I will answer as soon as I am able. Have a great weekend, and I will see you Monday on Zoom. Adios.